So, you've downloaded the Ultimate Draft Kit. Congratulations on taking the first step towards dominating your fantasy football league and also becoming the best version of yourself. Okay, so legally we can't really guarantee that second part, but moving on. So you've gone through the draft kit, you see the tiers, the rankings, the sleepers, the breakout guys, all the stuff you know and love about fantasy analysis, but you see this little tab up there called Reception Perception. You open it up and you're confused. You're overwhelmed. There's a lot of data that just got thrown at you. I completely understand. But luckily, I'm Matt Harmon, and I'm actually the creator of Reception Perception. And I'm here to help you understand it just a little bit more. So about 4 years ago now, I developed this methodology to evaluate and understand wide receivers, really give you information that you can't get anywhere else about the position. And wide receivers are tough, man, because there's a lot of them. Teams employ about 5 and 6, 3, 4, 5 can be on the field at the same time, and they all do very, very, very different jobs. And that's why it's tough to compare a player like a Jarvis Landry to, an Antonio Brown or a DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, those guys almost play completely different positions because of where they line up and where they're deployed. But that's what Reception Perception is here to help you understand and help you to break that down a little bit further. So with the wide receiver position in Reception Perception, you're going to get a lot of different metrics. The primary one is success rate versus coverage. And what I'm measuring here is how often these receivers get open. I'm trying to take the receiver and isolate them from the variable of quarterback play because, look, as fantasy football players, we know all too well that our really good receivers can get screwed when a quarterback is out there just messing it up. Think about Allen Robinson a couple of years ago or DeAndre Hopkins with Brock Osweiler. Then you suddenly see him get a good quarterback and he becomes one of the best receivers in fantasy football. Hopkins is a little bit of an outlier because he's so good, it doesn't really matter who's out there. But we know plenty of examples of guys that have been held back by their quarterback play. So what Reception Perception is helping you understand is what they do beyond that. The wide receiver's job is to get open and create separation and become a good target for a quarterback. And that's what these metrics are able to help you do. We measure how often they get open against man coverage, how often they get open against zone, press, and on each individual route. So when you're looking at the route graphics, you're able to see how often they run each individual route and how often they got open on that route. You can see players who have really high success rate on short to intermediate routes or even maybe those deep patterns, and you understand more of what you can expect from them on a fantasy football perspective. You're looking at it from these guys that have great success on deep routes. They might be a little bit more variable week to week from production-wise. These guys on shorter routes, they might be better at creating that instant separation and racking up a ton of yards and catches on the underneath targets. So really, this helps you break down wide receivers from a more in-depth perspective. You're looking at these guys in far more detail than you ever thought. But what I would encourage you to not do is to take one metric and assign it as a pass-fail grade. That's something I've never wanted to do with this series. So you're looking, kind of through these success rate metrics, and maybe you see a guy like a Juju Smith-Schuster, and you're like, hey, this guy was just really good for my fantasy team as a rookie, but he's lower on success rate versus man and press coverage especially. What gives? Well, that's really something I want to understand more and more with Reception Perception this year, is what they do in terms of how they're deployed. So you look at Juju Smith-Schuster, and he was a guy who primarily played outside at X receiver in college, but now as a rookie, he was used in kind of this big slot receiver mold. So you can look at the alignment data in Reception Perception and see he was often lined up off the line of scrimmage or even in the slot, kind of playing this flanker slot hybrid receiver mold. And that's why you see him have a really good success rate against zone coverage, really good success rate on those short to intermediate routes, and you start to understand more of what kind of player he is and what you can expect from him in that role. Also, you can use the Juju Smith-Schuster example or even the Cooper Kupp example, guys that kind of played that similar position that you can understand with this series. And you can look at them and try to identify maybe who's the next player that might be playing that. Maybe there's a rookie that's going to become his team's big slot receiver, and you can understand that, hey, maybe people don't think that this is going to be a big-time position, but you can see with Reception Perception, these guys that have these short to intermediate good slot routes and everything like that, and good success rate versus zone coverage, you might see that that's a player that really could become a breakout receiver in the right offense. Across other examples, You can use this series to help identify some value picks. Two guys that really stood out to me this year with good reception perception marks that people aren't really talking about as much, Randall Cobb and Rishard Matthews. Let's look at the Cobb example. Cobb is a guy who scored a 70% success rate versus man coverage. That is much, much better than we saw the previous 2 years. What that indicates to me is this is a player who's finally healthy, who just didn't time it up right last year with Aaron Rodgers. He's not quite as good, but he's getting closer to some of the results that we saw from that 2014 season when he was a monster for fantasy. But people aren't really talking about him, and you can use these reception perception metrics to understand, hey, this guy is going to get a lot of high percentage targets on those short routes. Maybe I want to think about drafting him. Let's use the Rishard Matthews example for now. You can see Corey Davis has some nice success rates on certain parts, and he's definitely a player that I'm a big fan of, and I know probably a lot of you are too. But look at Rishard Matthews as a guy who really scored well in success rate versus man coverage and zone coverage, had great success on the curl route and on contested catches. He's a guy that Mariota clearly trusts because of that. You can see that he might be a value pick within the Titans offense, that a lot of people are high on it bouncing back, but that hasn't really quite caught up to boost Matthews' stock yet. And I think this is a series that can show you why that might be the case now. This might be the year. I don't know that you're necessarily going to look at this series and think like, oh, this guy stinks and I'm not going to draft him. But you can look at guys who have kind of these lower percentage roles, like Alshon Jeffrey, for example. He's someone that, you know he's good. I know he's good, but you see that he doesn't have a very high success rate versus man or press coverage. And you're confused as to why that is. Well, look at how often he faced man and press coverage. It was some of the highest rates we've ever seen in reception perception history, and that decreased his overall success rates. What that says to me is that he's going to be a volatile producer because he consistently lines up X and sees the top cornerback on the opposing team. The Eagles' offense has a lot of other weapons that they can throw to if Jeffrey is tight blanketed coverage there on that outside. So maybe if you're looking at a team, and this is what's really important with receivers. When you're building fantasy teams, you want to get guys that complement each other well. You want to look at the Juju Smith-Schusters and Cooper Kupps that have that safe production floor because of the role they have. And then you want to look at guys like Alshon Jeffrey as players that are going to be volatile week to week but offer that really high ceiling because they're those big-time X receivers. You want to complement your roster with a lot of these different players. And I think reception perception is a great way for you to do that on your fantasy team. So that's kind of a brief introduction into what you're looking at, how you can use this with some specific player examples. If you have any other questions, feel free to hit me up on Twitter at @MattHarmon_BYB if you need a little bit more help understanding these metrics. I really hope you enjoy the Ultimate Draft Kit and especially the reception perception pages and some of the blurbs I've written for you. This has been kind of the heart and soul of my work over the last 3 to 4 years of my NFL career. And I am excited to share these takeaways with you and really understand the wide receiver position better than anybody else in your fantasy league.